In the golden age of sci-fi, alien invaders came in all shapes: bug-eyed monsters, rubber-suited giants, and creatures from Mars. But in 1972, Dan O'Bannon started the writing process that imagined something darker, something ancient and parasitic. In O'Bannon's original vision of Alien, before the arrival of H.R. Giger and Ridley Scott, the creature wasn't just a killer or some bioweapon. It was the remnant of a lost civilization, a being born from ritual and religion, in a pyramid buried deep beneath the sands of a storm-racked planetoid. A critic had written that Alien evoked the writings of H.P. Lovecraft, but where Lovecraft told of an ancient race of hideous beings menacing the Earth, Alien went to where the Old Ones lived, to their very world of origin. He was right. That was Dan's very thought while writing. That painful little storm-lashed planetoid halfway across the galaxy was a fragment of the Old One's homeworld, and the alien a blood relative of Yog-Sothoth. His exposure to the world of H.P. Lovecraft took place around the age of 11 or 12, when he read The Color Out of Space, a short story where a meteorite would crash into a farm and begin to corrupt its surroundings, causing madness and horrible mutations to plants, animals, and humans. One could see how the meteorite could evolve into a spore in Dan's mind, one that would surprise and corrupt its host, using it as a vessel for another creature. Even more of Alien can be found in Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness, which would feature a team that travels to Antarctica, a foreign and dangerous land like the aliens' planetoid, where they discover an ancient city like the massive derelict ship, with strange architecture, hieroglyphic murals, and the remains of aliens. There are other films and comics that included similar storylines and life cycles, but O'Bannon's Alien had a touch of darkness even before its reshaping by H.R. Giger that called back to H.P. Lovecraft, especially in its earliest incarnation, when the initial script was only half written. Dan told Cinefix that what he had at the time was pretty sketchy. He figured the crew wouldn't get off of the planet until the end, and that the creature itself would be some sort of psychic force, meaning that it wouldn't have a physical form, but he was having trouble working it out. It was Ron Shusett who finally broke the ice and brought up an old idea that he had about gremlins harassing a B-17 bomber crew on a night mission over Tokyo, and suggested that he make the alien a physical creature and have it stalking the crewmen on their own ship. And when he wondered how you could take weapons out of play in killing the alien without making them immortal, Ron Cobb came up with the idea of acid blood, which could tear through the ship and destroy it if it was damaged. Shusett would supply O'Bannon with yet another breakthrough when Dan was struggling with a unique way of how the alien would end up on the ship, and it would be Ron's brilliant idea to have it impregnate one of the crew by shoving a proboscis down his throat and implanting an embryo, giving the alien its horrific life cycle. So now, with a more grounded yet still Lovecraftian approach, an alien threat that you could touch, and a plot direction with the creature gaining access to their ship, he finally had a rounded out story that he could work with. The planet Mars would also play large in the sci-fi community after astronomers in the early 1900s believed that there were canals and possibly structures on the planet that must have been built by intelligent beings, which led to generations of stories told in books and films that focused on the red planet and its possible inhabitants. And you can see it in Dan's script, where his planetoid feels a lot like Mars with its mysterious past and its massive dust storms. But in Alien, it's a dust so fine that it can damage spacecraft, and it's so prevalent that it buries monuments like the Pyramid, which for O'Bannon was inspired by Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, which basically kickstarted the whole ancient aliens way of thought, where aliens were believed to have made their way to Earth, where they would teach and work with our ancestors, while also helping to build enormous monuments like the pyramids. The idea still lives on today, and would even inspire Ridley Scott's return to the franchise with the planet-seeding engineers of Prometheus. This wouldn't be Dan's only connection to Mars either, as he was the writer on the remake of Invaders from Mars in 1986. O'Bannon had sketched the pyramid's exterior, with just its peak rising above the sand, and Chris Foss and Ron Cobb, who worked with Dan from the beginning before the hiring of H.R. Giger, would flesh it out further with their amazing concept art. Foss provided a beautiful view of its exterior and a shot of its entrance at its peak. For its interior, he imagined a grand golden Colosseum-like room that was very decorative and filled with alien hieroglyphs and an altar for the eggs. Cobb's version of the chamber would lean more towards ancient and worn, with Mayan and Aztec designs, which were a bit more grounded and likely closer to the film's budget. His art would also include alien hieroglyphs on the walls, showing the life cycle of the creature at the time of making the piece, which was possibly before Giger came on board, as the alien on the wall is squid-like with tentacles. At the center is a massive stone block, a sacrificial table, with spore or egg-like carvings all around its base. In the script, the lower chamber is dark and full of strange hieroglyphics carved into the walls, which have a primitive, religious appearance. Row after row of pictograms stretch from floor to ceiling, revealing some epic history in an unknown language. Huge religious symbols dominate one wall, and spaced at intervals are stylized stone statues depicting grotesque monsters, half anthropoid and half octopus. Like a chapter pulled right out of Chariots of the Gods, this pyramid is the remains of an ancient civilization indigenous to the planet that thrived there a million years earlier. According to Ron Cobb, the alien had 3 stages in its life cycle. The eggs or spores would be held in the pyramid's lower chamber and would be used in a special ceremony. An egg would be placed on a sacrificial table, and lower cattle-like creatures would then be led into the area. Sensing the warmth of a living animal, the facehugger would spring forth and deposit an alien fetus into the stomach of its host. Once grown, the chestburster emerges under the supervision of adult aliens, as this stage of the creature is feral and feeds on whatever it can. But eventually, it will shed its appendages and become more docile, and once its bloodlust has subsided, it becomes a mild, intelligent creature capable of art and architecture and will live a full life of 200 years. However, if no adult is present to guide the young alien, it will revert to its earlier rage and destroy anything that it encounters. To O'Bannon, the inhabitants of this planetoid were tough and primitive, with an extremely complicated sexual cycle. Reproduction was very difficult for them, and had therefore become central to their religion. However, an unknown cataclysm from some time in the past would nearly exterminate the alien race, leaving only a group of eggs waiting silently in the dark. Producer David Giler didn't care much for von Daniken's theories, and during rewrites, the pyramid became a man-made complex. But O'Bannon and Ridley knew that wouldn't work, so Giger proposed an egg silo, which unfortunately was merged into the derelict ship, shifting the alien's origin from a native species to a deadly cargo, which was not Dan's intent. Though originally Giger was only going to design the alien, but this would expand to the derelict and the Space Jockey, which all featured his trademark biomechanical design, making them all feel somehow related, a theme explored in Ridley Scott's prequels. Dan had worked with H.R. Giger on the failed Jodorowsky Dune project before working on Alien, so he knew from the beginning that he wanted Giger to be the one to design his monster. While earlier designs by Cobb filled in the blanks, Dan knew that none of them were quite right, so they became placeholders waiting for Giger to deliver something truly disturbing. This could be why the first draft of Alien is pretty vague on describing the various stages of the creature. The eggs or spores can be found in 2 different states. The closed ones, with facehuggers still intact, are said to be like leathery urns or jars, with peculiar markings on them that are soft and react to touch, as the spore that Broussard touched raised slightly where his fingers made contact. For the eggs that are empty, they have hardened and are described as glossy urns that are brown in color, and instead of opening with petals, they have a round cap that falls off when it opens. The lid appears more organic than artificial, and the inside surface is spongy and irregular. I also think that it's pretty interesting that the spore or eggs are also called urns, and they seem to have markings on them, making them in their open state seem a lot like the engineer steatite ampules from LV-223. The facehuggers are said to be small octopus-like creatures, which to be fair, is close to the facehugger with its many fingers or tentacles. You'll see tentacles mentioned a lot here, which were common in the earlier Alien or Monster films. With the facehugger still on Broussard's head, they use an X-ray machine to look inside of him. Its proboscis has extended down his throat, and there is a stain on his lungs, a dark blot in his chest, which is completely opaque. Melkonis says it's some kind of fluid that blocks the X-ray, and that it could be depositing some kind of venom or poison. Once the hugger falls off and dies, it dissolves in its own acid, and while the crew is eating, Broussard's chestburster tears its way free from his torso, with a fist-sized head pushing out, revealing its thick worm-like tail, sounding a lot like the film-used version. The next time we see it, it's longer, like a worm with legs and tentacles, and when it's trapped in a storeroom, foodstuffs are ripped to shreds and scattered all over the floor, with one crew member Faust saying that it looks like he helped himself. Roby, who is Ellen Ripley in the film, suggests that the alien grew so big by eating their supplies, but it's also eating the crew. It was able to escape the room through a vent, and when the crew searches it out, they find a 6-foot monstrosity, ghastly beyond imagination, squamous and covered with tentacles. But before they could react, it hops down like an oversized bird and grabs Melkonis in its razor-sharp tentacles. Melkonis lets out a horrible shriek, and the thing grabs his head in one claw and twists it off like a man pulling the head off a chicken, then throws it to the floor with an audible clunk. The alien here is ruthless, and it's later found eating another crew member, and when they try to hit it with the flamethrower, it holds the poor guy up to take the brunt of the flames and escapes once more. Surprisingly, Dan wasn't too keen on Ridley's choice of basing the adult alien off of Necronom 4 from Giger's Necronomicon, as he thought it was too much like a man, and that there were much more grotesque stuff in Giger's works. But in the end, he figured that Giger will give them something better, and decided to keep his mouth shut. The director's cut of Alien features the ovomorphine or egg morphine scene, where the alien has created a nest of sorts and is turning captured crew members into eggs, explaining how the alien can multiply, but it's presented without Giger's touch in O'Bannon's draft. Hidden away on the Snark, the original name for the Nostromo, was the alien's lair, a horrible place full of bones, hair, shreds of flesh, pieces of clothing, and shoes. Hanging from the ceiling is a large cocoon, apparently woven from some fine white silk-like material, and it's slowly undulating. Flamethrower ready, Roby approaches the cocoon where he can see that it's semi-transparent, with his crew member Standard inside. Unexpectedly, his eyes open and focus on Roby, uttering those familiar words, "Kill me." Another cocoon also dangles from the ceiling, but this one looks a little different. It's smaller and darker with a harder shell. In fact, it looks almost exactly like the spores in the tomb, with Standard saying that was Melkonis. It ate Hunter. The Space Jockey is another creation that is hard for me to imagine without seeing Giger's version, but the original take on the alien was a huge skeleton sitting in a control chair. Its only description in the script was that it was a grotesque thing bearing no resemblance to the human form, with Ron Cobb submitting concept art of a humanoid skeleton with a large abnormal skull. After the encounter with the derelict and the alien pyramid, the ship's captain says that those things out there aren't the same, you know, the spaceship and the pyramid. They're from different cultures and different races. That ship just landed here, crashed like we did. The pyramid and the thing from it are indigenous. Dan would describe the Space Jockey craft as having a mushroom-like shape in his script. However, in Giger's Alien, the book H.R. made about his work on the film, he says that his derelict design was originally not well received by Gordon Carroll and Michael Seymour, and that they wanted a new look, saying that it was too much like a bone and that it wasn't aerodynamic. Giger would say in the book that he thought the complaint originated from O'Bannon or Shusett, and to his point, Dan did say that he thought that Ron Cobb's derelict was too convincing, like a flying saucer, and that it was the one by Chris Foss that he liked the best. Telling Cinefex, "I conceptualized the derelict as a gnome's castle, colorful and interesting and bizarre as hell, but not morbid. Chris Foss did a wonderful painting of the ship which is still my favorite. It was a beautiful bronzed lobster-like thing sitting on the sand, very technological, very odd looking, and very difficult to figure out quite how it would fly. I can't help but wonder if his choice of the word morbid was referring to Giger's submission that eventually won out." In the Alien franchise, unused ideas usually find a way of returning in later entries or in the expanded universe, and the same is true with O'Bannon's work. In 2020, a comic book remake of his original screenplay would show us new takes on the early designs. I like what they did with the Space Jockey skeleton, making it familiar yet still unique and alien, but I think the spores were too organic and should have been more like urns as described in the script. And the adult alien was a bit too close to the film used version for my taste, and should have had razor hands and a more 1950s to 1960s look that Dan likely had in mind. By the end of O'Bannon's script, the alien is blown out of the airlock just like it was in the film. But as it exits, it grabs Roby's leg with a tentacle, and only lets go when the door closes on it, sending the alien tumbling off, with pieces of it falling away as it bloats up and bursts, finally killing it. leaving us with Roby and the recovered Space Jockey skull, which reminds me of John Spaihts' unused Alien engineer script for Prometheus, where at its end, Elizabeth Shaw, or Watts, kills the ultramorph alien that emerges from the engineer and hangs its head on the lifeboat that she is stranded in on LV-426 at the end of the script. He had little love for the later sequels in the franchise, but admitted that Cameron's Aliens did the smart thing by going action heavy and by introducing the Queen, though he said that he would have turned the whole project upside down altogether, and that he would have been more radical in the treatment of the alien itself. So if you saw the first movie, there'd be plenty of surprises and shocks again, not just finding out that they have a queen. The other sequels, he thought, never should have happened, but he did get brought in part for Alien vs. Predator with Ron Shusett, where his unused pyramid and cocoon ideas were going to be used, which is how they got credit on the project. He did offer up an idea for the film that would link the alien to the predator, where the alien's next unseen stage would be a predator. Thankfully, this idea wasn't used, and in the end, he thought that the movie was like a video game, and that it was better than everything else beside the first two films. What are your thoughts on O'Bannon's world of Alien? To learn more about H.R. Giger's world of Alien, check out this video. Otherwise, thanks for watching, take care, and I hope to see you next time.